So when I look at this, there's so many other things that we consider when we want to decide on a career at this day and age. What, in your opinion, is the difference in choosing careers, say, like 50 years ago, and how has it changed now?
Oh, the sea change actually. 50 years ago, you chose a career that the family was very familiar with. Again, it comes from the way that the mind is very comfortable with what is familiar.
Right.
It's very easy, you don't have to debate, you don't have to go back to, can I trust this, will I survive in that field, etc., etc. Because there are a lot of, luminaries perhaps in the family or the field, etc., etc. So it's very easy to step in, but that's the line of least resistance. Obviously, for a personality, that's the line of least resistance, albeit successful. And no quarrels if you're successful in that field, as long as you give enough room for your passion to function with you. Right. That happened, let us say, 50, 60 years ago. The second level came where education became so important, subjects and the guidelines of the way education was designed to take you to higher education realms, as we talk of it in India. Then you had to make a choice whether you would be just a graduate, just a postgraduate, or you would choose a career. And that had opened up many more avenues than just what a family offered. And therefore you were allowed to make a choice. I think from the Indian perspective, as long as you showed a good academic acquisition in the disciplines that were required for that subject. So if you wanted to do law, you had to have language.
Right.
If you wanted to do science, you had to have logic, and so on and so forth. So if you had that, I think families were reasonably open to suggesting that you could pursue your own careers. They had traditional careers, as women can be teachers or doctors. I think more from insecurity than from not permitting a child to be in that field. I think then came a time when people chose their careers. There were all this opportunity for top class institutions in India like the IITs, the IIMs, and people made a mark and went in there and then expanded, with the management studies, they expanded into many, many, many fields. Yeah. And I think there's a whole lot of successful career options that people have had that have benefited, I think, even the nation. But I think today's child is living in a world which has become a global world. It is no longer even that single dimension of saying, if I get a job in my own country, I'm very happy. I think the perspective has shifted to being a global perspective. And education also has allowed that in many, many ways, because we've been reasonably competitive by gaining admission into, a lot of luminary universities outside, builds the confidence of parents, and then you go there, and today's careers have shelf life. Unlike the yesteryears. What was a great career about 10 years ago, today probably has disappeared from the horizon. So I think today's child, and I'm hoping desperately I'm right because I'm not a child to understand the perspective, but I do have grandchildren, but I believe today's child must be capable of switching careers if the need arises. And this is where I believe that the educational system should scaffold a child to knowing how to learn rather than what to learn, because that facilitates your switching of careers when you need to do it without any difficulty. It's a great case study in the Indian scene itself, where in Jalandhar, people were making little transistors 50 years ago for music to be portable. Suddenly they found they had time to sleep or lounge, and they learned how to assemble a transistor, and they became leaders in making transistors and selling them, which had quite a good shelf life, I think. But why did they succeed? Why am I saying Jalandhar? People there were learners, and therefore they were 40 or 50. They knew that no longer is a megaphone the music provider. I need to have this because people are having that and don't want my megaphone.
Right.
Okay? So today's day and age, when we have this big global university called Google, I think if we would know how to learn, it's available just by the click of a mouse. So it is the aptitude and it is the perseverance that I think we need to give in children. But they don't become blinker-eyed to say this is the path I've been in, and if it has disappeared, it's bad luck or it's the destiny or whatever, but to take the bull by the horns and create a new career for yourself. As a matter of fact, as I'm saying this, I also realize people today who retire at 60 are strong enough for yet another 15-20 years. Take me. So nobody wants to sit idle when your muscles are asking you to expend the energy built up. So you want to do something and you can have another career. And if you can't learn the skills that are required for today's world, then woe be to you. So the name of the game is to sustain a learning perspective of multi-skills. Empower yourself in different fields of understanding the world around you, because that's the reason intelligence was given to the human being.
Absolutely.
And if you keep these two together, I think all the world is a stage where you'll get a role to play.
So it's not just about being multi-talented, but also the courage and the confidence to take a different direction if one closes.
That's a good link to offer. You can be brilliant, you can be talented, but if you don't have the personality, then I think quicksand beneath your feet.
And that brings us back to the personality development in early childhood, where you said trust and being exploratory in that sense.
There are 2, 3 or 4 ideas which come into play as a personality during, essentially anchored during the early childhood, which is birth till about 7-8 years. You can extend it for a couple of years, and I believe you can extend it up to primary school. The first is trust, and the anchors of trust are built from the home. Okay, so it's very important for parents to make the child feel that this is an atmosphere of trust, because then he perceives the world with a sense of trust and not mistrust.
Right.
Okay, that's the first. The second thing that the human body explores is our autonomy. We can move by ourselves. The joy of a child who can race from you when he's going to pick up, a worm on the road, and you're just dashing to get him, but he's faster than you, and you wonder, how did he do that?
Right.
So autonomy is a great inner desire to be achieved by this human self that we are, born into. Autonomy is not just the ability to do things yourself, like whether it be tying a shoelace or putting the food in your mouth. Autonomy is to be able to stand for yourself when the time and need arises.
Very true.
Autonomy is the ability of a little child to ask for help when he's struggling, so his confidence builds. Autonomy is the confidence of a parent to know that his child will achieve whatever heights they think he should achieve aspirationally or by capability, provided they give him the autonomy and don't become a permanent crutch for him. And all this not just lends to the physicality of the body, but it shapes the mind to be one which is secure in what we are capable of. Because ultimately the survival in the world will happen with what I can do by myself.
Yeah.
And that's what all the skill development base, etc., are all
Right.
about.
Could you give us the Indian perspective, ma'am? What is your experience working with the teachers here, and what are your observations and what are your suggestions to modify the way their children are taught in school?
As far as observation is concerned, there's a lot. Parents are very aspirational, and rightly so. I think they want education. That's a huge positive step in today's world, in my opinion. I think that's a huge statement that I wish to make, that everybody is investing in the idea called education. Having said that, and pitching on the aspiration, I don't know whether all parents have the right perspectives of giving a child the freedom of choosing a career where his passion ignites versus choosing a career that I think will build bank balance. You know, I think there is a way of steering, parents have a way of steering the child to give them the negatives of what might happen, which is a fear based. If that happens, then that what will you do at that point, etc., etc. Here you have a ready-made hospital or a ready-made office, and all you have to do is to go on and all that. That's point one. I think therefore the aspirations of parents have definitely to be revisited, looking at what the child has developed as capability, passion, or whatever he has to offer into the world when he goes into the world by himself. That's one aspect. But the second aspect is the institutions of learning, starting from schools, are very aspirational themselves. And they are aspirational from a different perspective. They are aspirational from the level of saying, advertising even, for instance, 80% gets above 100% in marks. So it's an academic stance that they are pushing. Professions need people of character. Professions need people whose thinking can go well beyond today and reach up to the 40 years that they will be in the profession. They don't just have to exist in the same place, they have to change with times. And for that, a researching mind is critical. How can you exist without looking at a research of what will be the future? So I think that institutions also have to relook whether their values they uphold for the 22nd century or whatever years ahead are being accommodated with children. And why I sit with a sense of worry, Shruti, is this. I am sorry to see that it's the academic focus that's being advertised and projected rather than experiential inputs. I think a few people will have great success in academics, but everybody has an experiential experience. So I think if we can build the experiential format of learning as more important than an academic mark sheet, I think the glory of each individual child will be crowned when he leaves the portals of a school as an adult.
Definitely. Do you work with teachers in this aspect?
I do training. I do training with teachers. And there is one very important dimension that has come, observing changing times in this present flow that I've had for 40 years. I think that schools are made up by the presence of a board which dictates the content at every level. Okay? Schools are made up of teachers who are handed out syllabi based on the board's requirements. And therefore teachers put in all their energy in teaching a lesson, often very hard pressed for time, therefore compressing it in a corset perhaps, doing revisions, giving them tests, trying to, believing that a test will anchor the learning, etc., etc. But what a teacher does not understand is learning as a process is the work of the child's brain. And that's where this whole idea of mindfulness, that's the name of the game in today's world, comes into play. The brain functions best with mindfulness. And if in today's dimension, I don't know why I have to learn by heart 4 1s are 4, 4 2s are 8. Then my brain says, no, I too didn't see that you used it for 10 days, throw it out. What has been happening is there's been a gentle fear introduction that if you don't get above 60, you can't be in this school. If you don't get above 50, you can't do your 11th and 12th, etc. If you don't get 99.99, you can't be a professional. I think these are fear inducers, and I am terribly, terribly disappointed. And if I had to give you one little tip or strategy to make a change, if every year we could ask children to frame a question paper on the subject they studied, not answer the question paper that you gave, but to frame a question paper in their minds of what they would like to learn beyond what they have learned, I think that will be a great test to know they are engaging with the subject.
That's nice.
You know, you give them a test, okay, you have to do it, you've done it, but give them time to frame questions. Give them time to frame questions, support them, scaffold them to hold on to the questions, to develop a perception about how the question is turning around. I think then you would release him when he's 18 into a world where the exploration will be delightful.